Hi, my name is Katie Edwards, and I lead the junior high ministry at Saddleback Church. My husband and I have 3 children, one in college, one in high school, and one in elementary. So we find ourselves parenting in all sorts of phases at any given moment. And it often feels like we are barely surviving, let alone actually thriving as parents. Maybe you can relate. And in case this happens to be the first on-track parenting session you're participating in, let me remind you of what we defined as the ultimate purpose of parenting. The purpose of parenting is to raise children to be interdependent, lifelong followers of Jesus who desire to make a kingdom contribution. Now, I've been working with junior hires for almost 25 years, and I've parented 2 junior hires of my own. And while my experiences have taught me lots of lessons, one sticks out. The junior high phase is all the things. By that I mean, it's lovely but confusing. It's crazy yet wonderful, and it can be frustrating and cause you to seriously question your parenting abilities. It is all the things, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be marked by frustration, fear, or a frantic atmosphere. I really believe this is one of the sweetest phases we get to parent, so don't be afraid. It is tough, make no mistake about that, but it's tough because of the very unique nature of this particular phase. But understanding, appreciating, and adjusting to the phase of life that your junior high child is in can help make the journey a whole lot smoother. So, what are some of the things to understand about your child in the junior high phase of their life? Let's take a quick look. First, it's important to understand that the junior high years are marked by change. Gosh, there is no better word to describe this age. It's the word you need to remember every day with your kids. Physicians and developmental experts agree that other than the first 2 years of life, no other time of development experiences more change than the junior high years. To make a whole lot of brain and developmental science simple, just about everything is changing in a junior higher's development. No wonder they're crazy, right? Remember how much change your kid is experiencing will help lower your frustration level and help you parent them in the midst of their crazy. Let me share 4 of the bigger categories of change that your junior high child is experiencing or about to experience. The first is physical change. The junior high phase is often marked by physical changes of all sorts. Primarily the onset of puberty, which triggers growth spurts, muscle development, acne, voice changes. You probably remember, or maybe you blocked it out. While we as adults recognize these changes are totally natural, they are being experienced by your child for the first time. And it's often the cause of a great deal of anxiety and insecurity. Here's a simple parenting tip to help you and to help your child navigate these physical changes. Don't minimize. Don't minimize their feelings over being too tall or too short. Don't say things like, everybody gets a pimple, get over it. Remember, these changes are new for your child, and they need a safe place to navigate their feelings and insecurities as they experience them. Now, another change your junior hire is facing is intellectual change. Junior hires are beginning to think more abstractly, to ask bigger, more important questions. They are learning new insights and processing these insights in a way they didn't when they were younger. As a result, they may push back against rules that no longer make sense to them. They may question or doubt their faith. They may ask for more lengthy explanation about topics they used to accept at face value. Here's a parenting tip for the intellectual changes. Embrace the questions and the doubts. Questions are good, especially when it comes to your kid's faith. Doubts are healthy and normal. Encourage your child to ask questions and to wrestle with what they believe. A faith that is wrestled with is a faith that is eventually owned. So don't freak out when this arm of development kicks in. It's a wonderful thing when your junior hire leans into their doubts, when they develop critical thinking skills and begin to think more deeply and honestly about life issues. Now, in addition to physical and intellectual change, I know this is a lot of change, this phase is also marked by emotional change. Junior hires are famously emotional. Their highs are higher than ever and their lows are lower than ever. A misunderstanding with a friend may result in a weekend of tears. A setback that an adult might brush off in the moment can result in the worst day ever for a junior hire. Here's your parenting tip with with the emotional changes that your junior higher is experiencing. Master the circle back. It's tough to reason with your kid in the midst of extreme emotions. So saying things like, why don't you take a beat before we talk more? Or, I see that you're really upset. Why don't you go calm down in your room or outside and we'll talk later? And then make it a point to circle back later to the same conversation. It might be within the hour or before they go to bed or even the next day. It's not always the easiest thing to do in the heat of an emotional moment, but I find that when you give a junior higher a little bit of space to calm down and think, it'll lead to better results. It also gives you as the parent a chance to calm your frustration levels too. Junior hires are emotional wrecks, and there's very little that you can do to change that, but you can be intentional in how you respond when the emotions hit. And finally, social change. This is a big one. When you add up the physical, intellectual, and emotional changes that your child is facing, it makes sense that this would be the time that they would begin to experiment and change socially. They will often begin to shift their friendship circles or try out for new clubs or sports teams or suddenly be incredibly interested in going to a dance or a party. In elementary school, friendships are usually based on demographics or proximity. You know, you're friends with kids on your street or the kids that your parents are friends with. But in junior high, friendships begin to revolve around affinity and the things that they have in common. In other words, junior hires begin to want to be friends with kids who are like them. Athletes want to be friends with athletes. Cool kids are attracted to cool kids, and bookworms are attracted to bookworms. This isn't a hard and fast rule, and I don't mean to stereotype, but it does explain why in junior high your child may begin to move away from friendships they've had for years for no deeper reason than they just don't have as much in common as they used to. Here's your parent tip. Help your child safely navigate these social changes. Obviously, you need to pay close attention to their new circles of friends, but avoid the temptation to overreact too strongly too soon to their new social choices. And try not to give them too much grief or guilt about no longer being buddies with the kid down the street. Remember, when they were 5, they probably had a lot in common, but now that they're 13, it's likely that they don't relate to each other anymore, and that's okay. Now that you have a very basic understanding of the key areas of change your junior higher is experiencing, and I mean very basic. I know I went through those things really fast. Let's talk about your role and some goals you might set for yourself in this really important phase. Now, to review just for a second, when your child is a newborn up until around kindergarten, your primary role is that of a caregiver. You provide virtually everything they need. And in elementary school, you add a role because you certainly don't free yourself up from caregiver yet, sorry. You add the role of the cop or the corrector. And in the junior high phase, you add another role. You become a cheerleader. Now, of course, you're still a caregiver, but you're probably not as much so when your child was 18 months old. And of course, you are still a cop. In fact, junior hires need a lot of rules, accountability, and correcting. But more than both of those, because of this uniquely challenging phase, junior hires need a cheerleader. Your junior high son or daughter desperately needs to know you are their biggest fan, that you believe in them, that you think they're awesome, and that they need you in their corner. And as their cheerleader, I think there are 5 specific goals you want to aim for during these years. I know I said there were 5 basic goals for your child during this phase, but I need to add one more. You may have noticed that in each of the 2 previous phases, we provided a phase-specific spiritual goal. For birth through kindergarten phase, your goal for your child is to see your faith. For the elementary age phase, your goal is to nurture their faith and to set the stage for a faith of their own, which leads us to the spiritual goal for your middle-aged child. You want them to own their faith. There's an old saying, God doesn't have grandkids. In other words, your faith in Christ can't carry your junior higher any longer. They need to develop their own relationship with Jesus. The faith that they may have inherited from you as children needs to be a faith that they embrace and own as their own. And the unique changes they are going through help set the stage for this to happen. The Bible doesn't show us very much about Jesus' life as a teenager, but the end of the 2nd chapter of the Gospel of Luke, we get a tiny peek into early adolescent life. The little window of insight is from when he was 12 years old, and without his parents' knowledge, he slipped away to hang out in the temple courts, listening to the religious teachers and asking them questions. His parents had no idea where he had gone, and their reunion 3 days later was a little bit tension-filled. And then Luke chapter 2 ends with this observation about Jesus. Luke 2:52 says, "And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." As a 12-year-old, Jesus' relationship with his parents was changing, and he was changing. He was growing physically in stature. He was growing intellectually in wisdom, and he was growing spiritually in favor with God and socially favor with man. That single verse shows us that the changes your middle school child is facing are the exact same changes that Jesus Christ went through at that age. Isn't that wild? And you play a role, lots of roles actually, lots of really important roles. But perhaps the biggest role you can play for your child in this middle school phase of life is simply that of a cheerleader. Believe in them, encourage them, let them know that you're in their corner, be their biggest fan. They really need that. And as always, we've provided some questions for discussion or reflection on your own with your spouse or with your small group. We'll see you next time.